Hi, my name is Christina Adams. I'm a PhD student at the University of Tennessee. I've got a question for you. Do you think that we can see statistical significance in stock price movement based on whether or not companies are tweeting out relevant information? We actually have a study that came out in the Accounting Review, one of our top peer-reviewed, rigorously testing journals, that tells us that there is an effect, a statistically significant effect, in fact. So I'm going to talk about this study for a minute. One of the things that's important to take from this study is that they're able to conclude on liquidity risk. So let me talk about liquidity risk. Liquidity risk is an additional premium that a company has to pay if they have low information given to the public. So whether it's public debt or public equity, we could also extend this to private debt and private equity. So information asymmetry, we know, has a relationship with the liquidity risk and the liquidity premium. So this has already been known that if you have a lower asymmetry, so more information given to the public, then you're going to have a decrease in the liquidity risk. The liquidity risk is something that the company ends up having to pay. So what we've learned from this study is that one of those mechanisms where you can disseminate information is through Twitter. So in this study, they only looked at Twitter because they had to hand collect the data and couldn't download a database with all of this information in it already. There was a huge cost and time into collecting this information. That's what went into their decision to only test Twitter. And there's no reason to believe that we wouldn't be able to extrapolate these results and also conclude that there's a more general conclusion, meaning other social mediums should have the same effect on liquidity risk as long as the information is being distributed. So let me talk about this study for a minute. You probably remember reading headlines and seeing there's an association between people who eat hot dogs and who get colon cancer. And what you always wonder is, well, did they take into account lifestyle choices? Did they take into account age? Did they take into account all of these other factors? Well, in research that's published, yes, they take those things into account. It's called multiple regression. So any concern that you might have about, well, what about this? Well, what about that? They take care of that in published studies by controlling for and having those the effect of those other confounding factors show up elsewhere so that we can isolate what we're interested in. So that's what this study does. I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes. So this study is accessible on Google Scholar, and I'll put the link for this study in the video also. So right now I'm looking at the main results. So this is the multiple regression analysis I referred to earlier. Here they're looking at the bid-ask spread. So this is our proxy, our best measure for what liquidity risk is. What we expect to see is that the more information that's disseminated, the lower the spread, meaning the lower the liquidity risk. So what we find on this important variable here is in the link to PR, meaning any tweet that included a link to a press release had the intended effect. We expected to see this negative number, and we expected to see statistical significance here, telling us that there is a decrease in liquidity risk when there's a tweet that includes a link to the press release. Beyond that, the next thing we know is that any tweet that has a link in it, beyond the normal amount of tweets that a company gives. So they took into account a company that tweets a little, a company that tweets a lot. If you include a link, there's actually another effect on liquidity risk. And we see that it has a very strong statistical significance. Third, we can look at the number of clicks. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Exact same effect, negative and significant. So what else would be a confounding factor that you would be concerned about? The press. So it's not just a company controlling information that flows into the public, but also any article written by the press. So they take into account those articles. They also take into account company size, their growth opportunities, their stock volatility, their stock turnover, their stock return, the level of disclosure a company usually gives, and the number of owners that they have. So all of these things that might have been affecting whether or not you believe that result exists is taken care of in these other variables and shows up. So we can still conclude that our main result shows up even beyond taking account of these other factors. There's another interesting thing I wanted to show. One thing that they didn't take into account in that multiple regression analysis is how visible are these companies that we're talking about. If Apple tweets out something, is that different from a mom and pop shop that tweets out something? Yes. So here in table 7, we see that they split out high visibility companies from non-high visibility companies. What we see is that this effect, so we were relying on this to tell us if there was an effect on our liquidity. Most of that effect is driven by the non-high visibility firms. This was our second variable of interest, the number of tweets that are abnormal compared to the number of tweets that happen outside of any other information coming in. The effect shows up mostly in the non-high visibility firm, and same effect with clicks. So the non-high visibility companies are the ones that are drawing this result. It's the reason that we see the result is because it mostly shows up in the firms who aren't giving information out as highly as other companies out there. So what this really means is if you're a smaller company or a medium-sized company, you have a great ability to be able to affect your liquidity risk and lower the liquidity premium that you pay on your debt and equity by using Twitter. And this study tells us that if you include a hyperlink, we see a difference. The number of clicks also shows a difference. And if you include a link to the press release. One last thing before I let you go. One more thing that we can take into consideration is whether or not it's good news or bad news and whether or not it's extreme or non-extreme news. Is there a difference in what we see based on splitting out the information or the companies in that way? And what we can see from this table is that no, there is not a statistically significant difference. There's no stars here to tell us that there's a difference between positive news and negative news and extreme news and non-extreme news. And that fits in, it's consistent with the idea that good information, bad information, at least we have information. So I hope this video has been helpful in letting you understand or have a greater understanding of the effect that Twitter can have on your financial outcomes. And I hope that JKW social media can help you meet any other financial outcomes that you hope to see in the future.